If you can take the ordinary and elevate it to something extraordinary, I think that's an artistic achievement. I really do.
I agree.
Yeah. But
100%.
if you take the extraordinary and capture it, you're still a good photographer.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you're a good photographer, but the elevating the ordinary, seeing the ordinary for its potential in the first place is the hardest part, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's, in the end, it's all about seeing, right? And
Boom.
yeah.
You said it. Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 394 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. Today I'm bringing you a conversation that I had with Mary Jo Hoffman, a talented photographer who has kept alive her Photo a Day project for over 4,500 days. Whew. Through this process of daily commitment, Mary Jo has made several profound revelations about life and the pursuit of this amazing craft we call photography. You will surely be inspired after listening today. I have some huge thank yous that I would like to make to our latest supporters of the podcast on Patreon. Thank you to Chip Greenberg, Trevor Valinga, Tracy Holiday, and Sherry Schmode for your generous support. Patreon is the best way to support this show. If you enjoy these conversations, please consider supporting the podcast by visiting patreon.com/fstop and listen. That's patreon.com/fstop and listen. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with Mary Jo Hoffman. All right. Mary Jo Hoffman, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. It's a delight to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
I'm excited as well. As soon as I looked at your photography and saw what you were up to, I was like, wow, this is definitely someone I want to talk to.
Well, thanks. I'm blushing. I don't know what to say. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So for people who aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Mary Jo Hoffman. I live in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, a northern suburb of the Twin Cities. And let's see, I'm 60 years old this year, and I have two kids, 26-year-old and as of yesterday, a 21-year-old. And I grew up in Minnesota, and I went to undergraduate at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is where I got into photography because I had a roommate who was into it. But I happened to be studying engineering just because I was good at math, and then stayed in engineering because I was really good at math. And I practiced that as a aerospace research scientist for 17 years. And in my late 30s, almost 40s, I quit doing that for a couple of reasons, corporate takeovers and family planning. And then I, was heads down with little kids for a couple years. And then as soon as the youngest went to preschool, I realized I had a couple hours to myself every day, and I wanted, what could I do with it? And so I decided I wanted to do something creative and picked up my camera I had been a hobbyist since college, but I picked up my camera and started this project called Still, which is a 1-a-day photo project, which I've been doing ever since. So 12 and a half years of making a photograph a day of found nature.
I love that. Before we dive into the photography, what exactly is a aerospace research engineer? Like, what kind of stuff are you researching?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, so I happen to work for Honeywell, and most people wouldn't know this. A layperson wouldn't know this. I mean, they may know Honeywell's thermostats on the wall, but a third of the Honeywell business, and it's a $10 billion company, is aerospace avionics. So it's all of the electronics in the cockpit, or what we call the flight deck, of almost all commercial airplanes. Well, Airbus, almost all of Boeing, much of the Airbus aircraft, plus every satellite, plus most rockets, plus all of the Air Force, plus half of the Navy. So, we sold the the cockpit or navigation and what we called flight controls, or the electronics, the computers, essentially, literally like, GPS, Google Maps today. It was that for aircraft, satellites, and military vehicles. So that's what my group, I was in research. So my group did flight controls, which, most people would recognize as autopilots. And it's interesting because in aviation, things take a really long time for good reason to introduce new things into the market. And when I left, we were flight testing something called parallel approaches into major airports. So right now airplanes come in staggered every other, a lot of airports have the parallel runways and the planes come in staggered, and a lot of airports are at capacity. So we were looking at technology to let them come in side by side safely. And it was called parallel approach. And we were flight testing that as a research project when I left 20 years ago. And I honestly don't know if that's in practice yet today. I should look. I know, because to go through FAA approval and actually get into the commercial aviation world, it takes really a long time. And I should look to see if that's operational, but that's what I was working on.
Makes sense. And I will just say your photography is very different than that very technical world of avionics.
Yes. Yeah. I went into avionics. I think I was a creative kid. I was a maker in a different family where I had more, I put myself through college. And so I had a very practical, I did it with student loans and and government grants. And so when I got out, I had a hefty student loan debt. So I had to be super practical about professional job that will pay well, that lets me pay off these student loans. And, so that's part of the reason I went into engineering. I wouldn't say it was a calling. I just happened to be really good at the math and physics required for it. I did end up loving it. I loved mostly, aerospace was never really a calling. It was a fun field to work in, but what I really liked is working with a team of really smart people that were passionate, and that I got that there. So that's really why I liked it. But anyway, I was good at math, but I think in a different world, I would have been maybe like an architect or something, right? That left brain, right brain, because I was a creative kid. I was a maker, and I don't know. I think maybe that was always there. I just, for 20 years, overemphasized one half.
Right. That makes total sense. Well, I want to dive in and talk about the project you started in 2012, which you call Still. And first of all, really cool project. If someone has the time, they should go check out your blog and just kind of scroll through and see all of the different images that you're creating. And you call it Found Nature, which I think I've had another photographer on the podcast named Kristen McCuish, who does a lot of that type of stuff too. She has like a homemade studio where she kind of arranges different things that she finds in nature, which seems like fairly similar to what you're doing. But I wanted to ask, what prompted you to pursue a daily photo project of Found Nature?
Yeah. My husband speaks French. We put our kids in a public French immersion school here in Minneapolis and in St. Paul, actually. And the kids, it was a K-5 program, and they were coming out of their fifth year, being able to read French, being able to understand French when they're spoken to them, but not really super willing to talk it. And so I had driven them to school, and the French immersion school was not in my neighborhood. So it was a daily commitment. And honest to God, I just wanted a return on my investment. Like, if I was going to put that many hours into driving kids to school, I wanted them to speak French, dang it. So we took a sabbatical. My husband's self-employed and his work is seasonal. So we took 6 months, went to southern France, tiny, tiny village, and put our kids in the local village school, and just for the sole purpose of them having to speak French. And so while we were there, it was 6 months with the kids in school. French, it was 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. It was the first time in my adult life, where we didn't actually, we weren't home. We didn't have a home to take care of. We didn't have businesses to take care of. We didn't have parents to take care, whatever, we were free for the first time in our adult life. So my husband started writing, and I decided to, I've always been interested in the visual arts, and I keep visual journals, and I collage and other visual art practices. So I thought, well, it was 2012, it was about 2010, that one a day project stuff was really catching on fire. I had been, until then, I'd been working full time in corporate. So I didn't even know the whole online blogosphere existed. I just didn't have time. I didn't have interest, honestly. So when I finally had time, and I was like, whoa, there's a whole community of people that are sharing their work, encouraging each other, giving feedback. And I thought, well, heck, I want a place, but you can't just kind of pull up a chair. You got to contribute. You know what I mean? Like, you got to bring your practice and offer it up for feedback. So I thought I would do a one a day project, had free time for the first time since graduating college. I just looked around. We were a nature family, hiked. I had a 2-year-old puggle, which is a neurotic, wonderful, loving, absolutely affectionate breed, but neurotic. And so he was way better behaved if he got out every day for a walk. And we live surrounded by nature. And I'm one of those people, and we all are, I think a lot of us are anyways, I'm hearing. If I walk on a beach, I pick up shells. If I walk on a trail, I'll pick up the blue jay feather. I'll pick it up and it comes home in my pocket. And so anyway, I looked around. On the windowsill was a bunch of beach rocks. On the dining room table were some, pine cones and blue jay feathers. And I thought, okay, I'll combine this daily walk with the puggle and then my dormant photography interest, and just make a photo a day of whatever I find when I'm out walking the dog, and I'll share it to this community. And that was it. It was going to be a 1-year project. People were doing at the time 30-day, 100-day, or 1-year projects. And I chose to do 1 year. And I haven't stopped. It's been 12 and a half years.
That's incredible. So many questions. I'm curious, how did your photography evolve through that practice? I'm guessing what we're seeing on your site today is a little bit different than what was there 12 years ago.
Right. You honestly, if somebody out there can explain this to me, help me understand why it hasn't evolved. It should have evolved. I expected it to evolve. I wanted it to evolve, and it hasn't. So it came, I thought about the project for 6 months before I did it. So I really had thought through the project, how it would fit into family life, what aesthetic I wanted. And the reason I thought about for 6 months was really because I didn't know what a blog was, and I knew I wanted to share the work on a blog, but I didn't have any idea what a blog was. So I was teaching myself how to build a blog, all that kind of stuff during those 6 months, but it gave me time to think about the project. And at the time I was really into like Scandinavian design and really graphic, spare. I'm a minimalist by nature. So all of those things wove their way into the project before it launched, right? It was going to be on a white background. Everybody told me I couldn't do white because that's commercial photography, but I'm not a professional photographer. So I didn't care that was that was considered commercial. It was my naivete played in. It was going to float on my subjects were going to float on a white background, and everybody says, you can't do that. You need a frame. And I was like, why? Why do I need a frame? What I conceived of was this quiet Zen-like corner of the internet. So the internet in 2012 was getting really noisy, and it was the time of Instagram filters, and everything was super saturated. And,
Right.
right. And so everything was getting too loud and noisy. And I just wanted to create this really quiet, calm corner of the internet. That's why I called it still, as in still life photography. And, but it was also a place to come and be still, and so when you scrolled every day, you'd come up, there's nothing on landing page, nothing at all, except for the photo. And then as you scrolled, you'd get the previous day's photos, but there would be I didn't want to break, right? I didn't want it to jump from one day to the next. It was just, I want seamless. That's why I couldn't do like a gray background, because you can't get the same gray 2 days in a row, right? And there's infinite shades of gray. So it was either bright white or pure black in order to get that seamless scroll. So that was the conception. Ironically, it hasn't, like, I thought through it so fully before I launched it 12 and a half years ago. If you go back to day one, the first post I made, January 1st, 2012, it will look like a post I could have made today.
Huh,
So,
okay.
yeah, it's interesting. And I kind of I wish I could sit here and say to you, I evolved. I got, my eye got, I developed my eye and my style, and, it evolved, but it didn't. It came out of the box. Maybe it came out of the box fully formed. Maybe I got lucky. I don't know. But 12 and a half years, and I've gotten technically better. I can do them faster. I've gotten better at Photoshop, obviously. I can do them faster. I've gotten better at noticing, finding my subjects, and I've gotten significantly better about knowing my local environment, the names of everything, and we're going to talk about that. Just this idea of knowing my place in deep, 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 deep knowledge of place, that I learned, but, aesthetically, it didn't evolve like I thought it would. Anyways.
I was going to say that makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, you spent a lot of time thinking about it, so it seems like there was no need to evolve. I think you answered my question in terms of you've evolved in terms of like execution and understanding the process and being quicker at it. And I'm guessing that the designs of some of your still life creations have gotten more interesting over the years, things like that. But in terms of like the concept itself, it stayed very much the same.
Yeah, it stayed the same. And yeah, all those other things got better. I did get more confident at composition, that kind of thing. But just aesthetically, it hasn't changed from the get-go. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, tell us about the transformative power of dailiness.
Oh, that's one of my favorite things to talk. I love giving workshops to creatives on this topic, because I end up sounding like an evangelist, and I'm not, but it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And so I didn't know this. I just started this. I just made a commitment to do this project for a year, and it was a calendar year arbitrary decision. And I started going. And then what happened is the project, because of this really graphic minimalist aesthetic, got some press. And I got enough press that the following, some of it wasn't going to come out till the following year. So after the end of the year, I kept going because the magazines that were featuring me weren't coming out till the following year. So I kept going. But what happened after that is that suddenly I'm starting to notice I'm living differently in the world because of this practice, because of this project. We'll get into this idea of placefulness, but the reason dailiness works so well is that it makes the practice more important than the product. And by doing that, so have you heard that Jerry Seinfeld thing about don't break the chain? Have you heard that story?
I actually haven't.
Have you ever done a one a day project?
Yeah, in fact, when I first got into photography in 2011, seriously, I did a 365 project.
Oh, perfect. So yeah. So, well, there's a famous anecdote about Jerry Seinfeld. A young comedian comes up to him after a show and says, "What's your advice for a young comedian getting started?" And Jerry Seinfeld supposedly said, "Get yourself a big wall calendar, one of those great big ones. Every day, write down one joke, and when you do, put an X on the calendar, and don't break the chain." And so essentially that's what I've done, right? Since 2012, I put an X on the calendar and I haven't broken the chain. And at this point, I can honestly say I'm way more committed to not breaking the chain than I am to the art. So it shifts. What that not breaking the chain does is it shifts the emphasis from the product to the practice. And by shifting that emphasis to not breaking the chain, it's frees up all sorts of, it eliminates, I would say, all sorts of roadblocks people have: perfectionism, procrastination. It lowers the stakes, right? Today's just one day. That's really low stakes. You know, you're not going to break the chain. You know, you have infinite more days ahead of you. So it lowers the stakes. It overrides perfectionism. It overrides procrastination, because you're committed to. I'm not committed daily to making a work of art. I'm just committed to not breaking the chain. And I mean, take yesterday, my mom, I have an older mom. She's been in and out of the hospital. Yesterday, I did a really, I'm glad this won't air today because, you're recording it. But, if you look at what I shot yesterday, it's not that interesting. Every day is not interesting. Every day is not a work of art. But, I've been doing this 12 and a half years. That's almost 5,000 images, so
Yeah.
I know, right? Think about it. So, 500 of them are going to be really good, and 50 of them are probably going to be really, really good, right? And that's not a bad body of work for 12 years.
Yeah. And to your point, it gets to that idea of, 10,000 hours and practice, practice, practice. And especially in not just in terms of the technical aspect of like understanding your camera and like it just being second nature.
Yeah.
Like
All
aperture,
that.
shutter speed, ISO, like that, not thinking about that stuff. I mean, that's going to get you there really fast. But then
Right.
also you're trying new things, you're failing, right? And failing's
Right.
like a negative word, but you're trying something, maybe it doesn't work out, but you've tried it and now you can build upon that thing and make it a little bit better next time you try that thing. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to that daily practice of using the camera, arranging elements, composing, understanding your settings, understanding the visual flow of an image, all the things that you're doing. It's building blocks, right? Like you're terracing up
Yeah.
and you're building and building and building. And so you do that for 10 years and you
Right.
get really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 5,000 images. So, each one, I would say on average, I put into it about probably an hour a day. So,
Okay.
I'm not to 10,000 hours yet. But anyway, yeah, you're exactly right. Matter of fact, me personally, and I don't know if this is the engineer in me coming out, I love to experiment, right? So that's actually a super fun part of it. I call it MacGyvering. How can I photograph this thing? Like, how can I even jimmy or jerry rig something to hold a subject while I photograph it? So I tend to bring my subjects into the house and photograph them on my kitchen floor. It's where I have the best light in the house. And I don't work outside because I do these hot, like really sharp images. And the wind is just even the tiniest breeze is too much to work with for me because of the bright white background. So I'm at like a +1 or 1.5 on exposure when I'm making my photos. So that the tiniest amount of wind makes it too difficult. So I tend to work inside. So it gives me opportunities to like MacGyver or jerry rig, something, compositions, I put things on glass and I shoot up from under them, and I I build structures with clamps to hold subjects into position. And so I actually find that part really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how can we design these challenges so that we don't quit them?
Oh, really good question. Super good question, because a lot of people do these 30-day, 100-day challenges. And if you just go on Facebook or Instagram and look up 100-day challenge, you'll find lots of them. Here's the thing I learned, and it's key, is remember that you're going to commit to not breaking the chain. And it's committing to that frees you up creatively to make art. So it's shifting the emphasis to not breaking the chain is going to allow you to be more experimental, more, more free, more liberal, because you're not trying to make art every day. But it's really important that in order to not break the chain, the minimum requirement to not break the chain is really easy to meet. So here's an example. I photograph found nature on a white background every day, post it to a blog called Still. It's I have a few rules for myself. No man-made objects. It's minimally manipulated. That's about it. So white background, found that day, Photoshop edited to a bright white background, and then posted to a blog called Still. But, and this has happened recently, the irony is I've been doing this 12 and a half years and I've been the busiest. I've had the hardest time not breaking the chain I've ever had in the last 4 months because my mom has been in and out of hospital.
Right.
So for me to not break the chain, I can literally pinch a leaf of plotted palm in the hospital, hold it against a white background, a white wall, and take a photo and edit out my thumb and call that today's photo. And
Totally. Yeah.
totally.
Simple.
Right. And I didn't break the chain. So the key to success here is make your commitment. I think 30 is too long, and even 100 is a little short. If you can commit to a year, and then commit to not breaking the chain, but make sure the minimum required to not break the chain is quite small, because life just happens. It just will. It does. If you overcomplicate the structure of your project, and then that you break, you miss a day, then you know what I mean? You lose all that momentum and all of that, all that psychic, positive force that's pushing you forward. So anyway, just structure it so that the minimum required to not break the chain is easy. And then you'll see the power of it yourself. It's so I call it a sneaky superpower. It takes away all the obstacles to creative expression, because you're distracted over here looking at the process and committed to not breaking the chain. But then you'll see within 30 days, you've created art. 28 of those images might be really not very good. You were just checking the box. You were just putting an X on the calendar, but 2 of them will surprise you, right? 2 of them will be like, oh man, that was really good. And so that's the power of it.
I love that. And do you give yourself like any rewards when you're done doing it for the day? Like, I get a scoop of ice cream or anything like that?
That's a good question. No, I haven't tied rewards to it. And that's probably good, because I would probably have made it like food, right? Like a whatever Girl Scout Thin Mint cookie, and that probably wouldn't have been really the greatest for my health, because I have made 5,000 images, so I never did.
Right. It could do like a bottle of beer, and that'd be really bad.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm curious, like, where do you find the inspiration for the subjects that you're photographing? Like, how do you come up with the ideas for the themes that you're weaving together in these still life images?
Yeah. When I find a subject, I have 2 criteria. It has to be either beautiful or interesting. And a good day is when it's both, right? So a really good day is when it's both. But those are my only 2 criteria. And, you have periods, like a couple weeks where the calendar's not super crazy. And during those periods, I'll get more ambitious. I'll do compositions, but a lot of times, like the last few weeks with my mom in and out of hospital, I'm doing the bare minimum, right? I'm just finding anything to not break the chain. Over the years, what I've gotten really excited about myself is getting deeper and deeper and deeper in my knowledge of my place. And so I'm just following my passions. I like to be really hyper seasonal if I can, and really hyper local. So the more seasonal and the more local. So, for me, this is happening today, and tomorrow it won't look like this. You know what I mean? So this fern looks like this today, tomorrow, and sometimes it's in an hour it won't look like this. Right now, we're in mid-September and the leaves are transitioning. So, I love the transition months. I love them. They're way more interesting than like full fall color in October. This, right now, when the very first sumac is turning red and the very first, black walnuts are turning yellow, and you can find them where they're in transition, they're half and half. That's what I get excited about. So that thing that, the more like this looks like this right now, and in an hour it won't look like this. That's what I get excited about. But my only
I,
criteria really is it has to be beautiful or interesting.
I love that. And I'm curious, as you were talking about the process, it struck me that I bet that when you look back through the images, it takes you back to what was happening on that particular day or that week or that year in terms of having a much stronger memory and a connection to those times and those places and what was going on in your life at that point in time. Because like you said, the more complicated compositions, maybe you had more free time, and the ones that are more like, oh, I just have to throw something together real quick, maybe you had something really wild going on that day or that week. And so I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about how this daily practice has made you more aware of your life or the things happening in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I think you know this, like every photographer knows, like you can probably look at every one of your photos. Well, I'll ask you, do you remember the moment you hit the shutter on all of your photos? Like,
Absolutely, yes.
right, right. So what does photography do, and why do we all like it? Because it makes us present, right?
Right.
I'm not new agey, but it makes us mindful. Like it brings us to the now, the here and now, the present. And I've got a portfolio of 5,000 images, and I can tell you where I found every one of those subjects. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. In it's simple as just being literally for a minute a day, being present, being where you are. Like I'm right here. I'm on this trail. I'm on Snail Lake Trail, and I found this, and I think personally that's part of why so many of us are so attracted to photography. It brings you to the present, right?
Mm.
It's a form of mindfulness that's different than meditation, but you have to be for at least a few seconds or a few minutes really, really, really present. Really present. People think you're not because you're looking through the viewfinder and you're not taking in the view in its entirety or whatever. I disagree. I think that choosing to photograph this image from this angle and thinking about how you maximize the contrast to the clouds to the sky and how you can pop some of the shadows or whatever, that puts you so present and that it's its own form of mindfulness.
Oh, I mean, I agree 100%. And there's actually been scientific research done on this from some psychologists where they had people who were engaged in photographing photographs in nature in a fine art aesthetic. And then they asked them a year later, like, tell us about what you remember about that day. And the people who were engaged in photography had a much stronger recollection of the events of that day than the people who weren't. So
Right.
it absolutely does have that effect on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know that you've talked a little about kind of photographing found subjects on a bright white background, but I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about some of the technical challenges that you've had to overcome related to how you capture your photographs in terms of perhaps lighting or how you get them to hold still or how you put them into certain shapes and things like that.
Yep. Good question. So I had a book come out in May. We'll talk about the book. And so I've been doing a lot of workshops as a result. I generally don't do a lot of workshops, partly because I have historically thought of my practice as so simple, right? I walk the dog, I pick up a blueberry jay feather, a handful of them if it's molting season. I bring them home, I arrange them on white poster board on my kitchen floor, and then sometime in the evening, I edit them on Photoshop and I post them to the blog. Super simple. Nothing too creative about that, right? Or too fancy or too difficult. Anyone could do it. But I started teaching workshops and I realized that the first two workshops I taught, I said, I didn't have any handouts or notes. I just said, well, we'll do it together. I always bring a box of nature bits. And I said, okay, let's make your compositions. And here's what I think about when I'm doing compositions. I give them compositional tips and stuff. And then we'll photograph it and then, pull up your laptops and we'll edit it together. Well, it turns out that I have been doing this so much, right? 5,000 days in a row and I go so fast when I'm editing that when I actually wrote it down, because people asked me to after the workshops, it was 4 pages of really tiny steps that I do to edit these images. Really, it's a lot of, because if you lift the bright white in a photo to the background of bright white, you're going to blow out all of your yellows and creams and whites and tans in the subject. And so it's just the iterative process of the slow lift of the background without blowing out the subject. But I do that so fast that I think of it as nothing. You know what I mean? Until you try and teach it to someone. So anyway, so that kind of answers my question, which is I photograph one of 2 ways. It's that I did evolve into. I either do sort of a portrait shot of a subject, a single subject. I tend not to do cliches. So I tend not to do like the rose in perfect bloom, right? I would much, much rather photograph the rose in the October garden that's just, a couple petals still hanging on. So I try to avoid, but I will do a rose, right? I'll do a October rose and I'll just prop it up in front of a window with a soft, white diffuser behind it and photograph. And then otherwise I'll do what's called flat lay. So it's on the kitchen floor, white poster board on the kitchen floor, and I'll make my composition and I'll photograph that. And in both cases, I still have to lift that background to a bright white. And so there is some Photoshop skills of lifting the background to bright white without blowing out your subject. If I have a dark, say I have a crow feather on a white background, super easy peasy, right? I mean, that takes me 10 seconds, 15 seconds. But if I've got, something that has some white or yellow or even like orange can get weird. Even the reds, when you lift them, can get weird. So, a lot of times I have to, just step it up as I lift that background up so I'm not blowing out the color of the subject. And it's not technically difficult. I probably use 4 or 5 different Photoshop. I use curves, layers, that's about it. Anyway, so there is a little bit of technique to teach, nothing particularly, no secrets. I mean, you know what I mean? I'm just lifting that background to right. So for example, getting back to making sure your project is a success. If I'm in a real big hurry and the day's getting away from me, I shoot with natural light. And I have, it's 7:30 and the sun is setting and I'm on the brink of not breaking the chain. I will know better than to do a complicated something light colored on a white background. I'll go find the dark crow feather or the pine cone and do that because that's not going to be hard to edit and post, So, right. Yeah, but doing the light subjects on a black background is hard. And then you can do the light subjects with a little bit of backlighting, depending on the density of the subject. So the backlighting can look wonky really, really fast. A lot of people use light boxes. I don't care for the look. It's personal aesthetic. I want the subject to just be softly, naturally lit. And so the backlighting has to be really soft. Just brighter than the subject. That's it. Just brighter than the subject. Like not bright. Otherwise it looks funny.
Yeah, that for some reason I had pictured you putting everything in a light box of some kind with external flash, but it sounds like I was completely wrong.
No, all natural light. And a million people tell me that I should use a light box, and why don't I use a light box? But then they use a light box, and then they send me their work. And it's interesting work, but it's a completely different vibe, right? Like, it's not my vibe. It has a more clinical feel.
Yeah,
and it can also get almost, because it can get almost a little abstract, right? Because the subject now looks unnatural. It looks different than how you see it in the real world, where the light is bouncing off the subject instead of coming through it. Anyway, that's my aesthetic. Yeah.
So I've been dying to ask this question. So you've been practicing over 5,000 images, very simple technique. Do you ever apply this knowledge to natural subjects outside of your house?
Do I ever take my practice outside?
Or just go outside and photograph without having your home studio?
Yes. I mean, if you look at my book, you'll see there are subjects that I clearly had to photograph outside because I live in Minnesota and we have 5 months of snow and ice, and there's a lot of pictures of ice, snow and ice. Because
Okay.
one of the sections of the book is this idea I came up with called 72 microseasons. Well, I didn't. I borrowed it from the Japanese, but then mapped my places, seasons into the 72 microseasons. So, 5 months of those 72 microseasons are snow and ice. So those pictures almost all had to be taken outside over the years. So I do absolutely. If we get a gorgeous hoarfrost, I mean, I'm out there, laying on my
Absolutely.
belly in the snow, trying to get a photo and swearing about the wind, and trying to build with diffusers, those round diffusers, trying to build like a box around myself so the wind will stop. So yeah, I do absolutely go out, in Minnesota in winter, the winter white sky. I use it. I use white walls. I use white floors. I use white paper as my background, and I'll use snow. So, if you look at the section in the book called 72 Microseasons, the very first picture is cattail stems sticking up through the snow. And so
Gotcha.
I will use the white wherever I get it. So that, the white background doesn't have to be just the poster board on my kitchen floor.
Right on. Okay.
I love a
Well,
white sky. I love a white sky.
You're like the only photographer I've ever met who loves a white sky, so that's awesome.
I know. First of all, I use it as my background, but also, when you have all that white sky, it's a soft light, and that's my aesthetic. So if you look at my images, they're all softly lit on a white background. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you ever use diffusers to kind of diffuse that light coming down?
I mean, just
yeah.
today, I was right before we got on to do the interview, I was making today's photo, and it's a beautiful sunny day here in Minneapolis in September, and it was too light, it was too bright, so my subject was getting overlit and overexposed.
Yeah, harsh.
Yeah, it's too harsh. So I actually had to get two diffusers out to just soften the light, because
Nice.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about placefulness.
Yeah.
What is it, and what role does it play in your photography and lifestyle?
Yeah. So, when I started this project, the first thing that I started to realize was this power of dailiness, right? And just how effective it is at building a body of work. And then the next thing I noticed was what we talked about, this mindfulness, which is, whoa, this is making me have to be present, flipping me out of autopilot at least for a few minutes every day. And that, like I was finding, that's a really interesting way to live in the world, is to be, it could have been meditation. It could have been a lot of ways to get that mindfulness, but creativity was my way to it. This project was my way to it, and it worked really great. And I found it a really great way to live in the world. And then what happened? So we're now year 5 or 6 into the project. There was like yet another level of expansion or insight that came from the project, was this idea called placefulness, which is I started to learn so much about my local environment that that it was changing how I lived in the world. And so, so the pressure of finding a new subject to photograph every day is hard, right? Especially,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it is not hard. And here's the thing, nobody believes me. I don't work ahead. So I did try to work
Wow.
ahead in year 1, and I found that stopping and starting is harder than just doing it every day. So stopping is, everybody thinks I'm crazy. Why don't you have like an emergency 2 or 3 images somewhere? And I'm like, because literally it's truly harder to stop and start than to just hammer an image out. Like I said, the potted palm on the white wall, and just commit to never breaking the chain. Anyway, people can work that out themselves. They may not agree with me, but what I found was that I don't work ahead, but I carry 2 or 3 ideas in my head at all the time. So right now, I just mentioned the black walnut leaves are turning yellow. I saw some of sumacs turning red and some of the maples turning orange. So, that's what I saw yesterday driving home from my mom's house. So I ended up photographing a tomato today, but I knew I had those 3 things I could go out and find on short notice if I had to. You know what I mean? So I'm always carrying 3 things in my head. But in order to make my days easier to find a subject on days where I wasn't just taking a leisurely hour walk with the dog, I started to, put together this map, this nuanced understanding of my environment, which is, the pussy willows just burst in March, right? Oh, the buds on that elm tree just got bigger overnight. So that means the sap started running, right? So the sap started running last night. And that means the willow's going to get really yellow. That means the red osier dogwood's going to start to get really red. That means the pussy willow's going to burst. And as soon as the pussy willow bursts, then I know that the maple buds are going to start to get large, and they'll burst a week later. And then I know that the willow catkins are going to show up. So, this all came. I'm not a naturalist. I didn't study biology. That all came, and I can walk you through the year in that kind of detail through the entire year. And that all came because of having to find a subject every day. So anyway, simultaneously, I'm acquiring, it's like accreting, I'm acquiring this knowledge of my place. And then I read Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing.
Never heard of that.
It came out during COVID. It was called How to Do Nothing, something attention economy, like, how to live within the attention economy or something. And anyways, she's living in California. It's COVID. And they had those crazy wildfires, and she was in Oakland. So she's like watching the world burn outside her apartment window, and she's locked in with COVID and spending, like all of us, spending really a lot of time online. And she was just getting really, really anxious. And so she writes this book. It becomes a national New York Times bestseller. It's a beautiful book, and her arguments are super nuanced and lovely. But it was also timing, right? We're all locked in and feeling anxious. And she came up with the term playfulness, and I use it because I'm coming to the same understanding independently, which is if I can get outside my own head and be in this place, right? If I can, be really present in this place and see, oh my gosh, that was the first mosquito, and then know immediately that the flycatchers are going to show up tomorrow. Migrating from the Gulf of Mexico, because they just follow the insect hatch up the Mississippi, right? So, it's just that it was just this lovely way of getting out of my own head and being present in my environment. And she came to the same conclusion. She did it by sitting in the Rose Garden in Oakland. That book became a phenomenon. And, but I borrow her, she coined the term playfulness, but at the same time, we're coming to the same understanding that this idea of a really deep, really nuanced relationship with a place, like a really specific place, is an antidote to the placelessness of life online. So
yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So one thing I noticed when I was scrolling through your images is that it seems like a lot of your work borrows from a lot of interesting design aesthetics, whether that be composition or color theory, things that interior designers know already, and people who do graphic arts, like they understand, like, oh, if you put a square here and a triangle there and a circle over there, like that does this. Yeah. And so I was curious, is that something that you slowly evolved into or learned, or is it something that you've been constantly borrowing from other sources?
Really, really good question. It's something I'm evolved into. So one of the reasons I started the project was I did want to get better at composition. I find composition like an elusive thing. Like I think a lot of artists and a lot of designers, whether graphic or interior designers or whatever, they just know it when they see it and they can't articulate why this works or that doesn't work. So people do try to articulate it, and I do read those books. I'm not trained as a graphic designer, but I really I like the art of composition, and even if you would, the science of composition. So why do we like, why do we like symmetry, and why does it sometimes work to break symmetry? Right? Why is it sometimes more compelling if we do as a human species have a preference for symmetry, and yet we also like we also respond to things where it's very subtly or very intentionally broken. So trying to understand why and how that happens. I do read about composition, and I do like try and take those concepts into my compositions and play with them. I have, though, like I said, I've gotten doing this for 12 and a half years. One of the positive outcomes was I established my style, right? So I just know what I like. I
Yes.
like ordered compositions. Some people don't. I like earth tones. I don't like primary colors. I like earth tones. If I'm going to do a color gradient, I want it to be near neighbors. Like I don't like rainbows of color. I like subtle gradations along a specific color band. Just simple things like that. That's what I find. Again, still was supposed to be this place of calm and stillness. So those are compositions I find calming. I have to share this. Can I share? I have to share this thing. I have this technique when I teach workshops called hip bump. And
Okay.
I learned it from a photographer, John Dolan, who used to photograph for Martha Stewart Living magazine. And anyways, I will make a composition. Mine tend to be gridded and orderly. And then I will photograph it. And then I will intentionally hip bump it or kick it, because mine happen to be on the floor. And then I'll photograph it again. And and it's about 50-50. And then I only post one image a day. So I have to pick at the end of the day which image I'm going to post. And it's 50-50, which one I like better. So there you go. And I started, after a while doing this for years, I started putting them on Instagram and saying to people, number one or number two, tell me what you like. And then I found it super interesting because I would get like 300 comments, and it was split down the middle. But the thing that surprised me is the people that that liked the kicked composition, they hated the gridded composition. They hated it. Because it made them anxious, because it was too perfect. It was too clean, too orderly. So what I did, I'm not surprised by the 50-50, but what I was surprised at was the vehemence with which people were in their camp, So anyways, that's just a little anecdote for you.
That makes perfect sense. Really appreciate that story. I think it helps too, because I find, so little thing about me is 4 years ago, me and 3 other photographers, we started a nature photography competition called the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, and every year we get about 10 to 15,000 images that are submitted into the competition, and the 4 of us go through and we kind of do what we call prejudging, where we're basically trying to eliminate the stuff that's like clearly it's got issues that we know that the judges that we've hired to do the final judging, they're going to throw that out. So we're trying to save them time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I find that we're usually split 50-50 on who has preferences for compositions that have a lot of things that might not work super well versus like something that's very clean and perfect and orderly. And so I think you're right that there is a strong predilection towards, either something that has a little bit more chaos versus something that has more order. And I don't know what that says about us as people, but I think it's awesome that you've been able to kind of tease that out through your Instagram posts.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I've done it like probably 4 times. You have to scroll a little ways back, but if you look at the results, the results are very interesting. And when I teach workshops, I put the results up and I say to people, you know, that's your audience. Like whatever one you prefer is your audience. Don't try and make art for everybody, right? You're making art for yourself and your audience, and quit trying to make art for everybody. Because those people that don't like, in my case, the gridded ordered, you know what I mean? They're never going to like it. That's deep. That was, if you read the comments, it's a deep response. They're reacting to something real deep. So anyways, it's just sort of accepting that you're making art for not even 50%, but maybe, a small part of the population that likes the things you like, and giving yourself permission to just make the art you like and be confident that your audience will be there.
I love that. That's something I teach everyone if I get the chance to. And it's first, you got to know yourself, right? That comes with a lot of practice, a lot of mistakes, a lot of things that you go like, I really like that and I don't like that, and then once you develop those preferences, you need to lean into them and try not to appease the people who are into something that you're not into. And I think it starts to show in your work if you try to please the people that don't like what you're naturally drawn to. It looks a little too formalized. It looks, I think it's a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, I think, matter of fact, this is back to dailiness again. If you're somebody who's like just starting out and you don't know what your style is, a daily project is a really fast on-ramp to getting to understand your style, because every day you're making that decision. Do I like this? Do I like that? Do I like this? Because when I get a subject, I will bring it in the house and I'll shoot it from 5 or 6 different perspectives, right? And then I'm editing it in the night, and it's just one more day in a 5,000 link chain. I'm not going to sweat the details too much, but I got really comfortable making that this or this, this or this, this or this. And then also getting comfortable with when I couldn't decide between the final two, like, do I want this composition better or this? Realizing it doesn't matter. If I can't decide, then they're on par. And then it doesn't matter. So it really was a fast on-ramp to establishing my style, my eye. And when I was a young photographer and at age 20 in Madison, Wisconsin, that's what I struggled with. Like, what's my style? What's my eye? And copying a lot of people, right?
Sure.
And this one-a-day project was when I found my style.
I think there's another exercise that's similar to that if you don't want to commit to doing your own project. And what you could do is, get a bunch of photography books, go through them, and then pick out, if there's a book of 100 images, maybe there's 15 of them that you really, really are drawn to. Take a picture of them with your phone or print them out, whatever. But then on the back or on an electronic document, list out the qualities of that photograph that you like. Right?
What you're responding to, yep.
Yeah, what is it that you're responding to? And then you'll start to notice themes that come out. And then when you're out in the field making your own images, you just tap into that information that you know about yourself, what you're responding to, and then that's going to start to show in your own work as well.
Yeah, it's a really good exercise. I like it.
Yeah. I've gone through that a couple of times over the years, and what's interesting is that it shifts.
Yeah.
At least for me, it does. I mean, I think they say if you're not evolving as a photographer, there might be something wrong with you a little bit.
Yeah, I've got to think about that, because my aesthetic didn't evolve. I'm ready to make a change. I'm ready to evolve. Well, I was actually ready to evolve my aesthetic a couple years ago, but then I had this book contract, and I thought I should still be publishing work in the same style. So I am ready. I'm ready to do something new, probably next year.
And that's a hard one too, right? Because it's part of who you are. It's like part of your essence as a photographer and as an artist, and it's hard to give that up, and it takes a little bit of bravery too. Yeah. All right. A couple more questions for you. This one might take a while, but Why should we accept the ordinariness of our lives?
Oh, I love this. So you must have really done your homework because I've only talked about this idea once, and it was on the 92nd Street Y lecture series, and I really feel strong about it. And I've only talked about it once, which is I did a 3-part lecture series for the 92nd Street Y, and the first one I talked about dailiness, and the second one I talked about placefulness. And on the third one, I was talking about this concept called living as a total work of art, where your life becomes your art and your art folds back into your life. And my examples were like Georgia O'Keeffe, where her art is inseparable from the high desert of New Mexico in which she lived. You know what I mean? And so I use examples like Monet and his water lilies, and Van Gogh and his sunflowers, right? And Cezanne in the mountain that he painted over and over again. And I showed these examples of how many times these artists painted these same subjects, kept revisiting them. Anyway, as I'm formulating my thoughts for this talk, it occurred to me that, Abiquiu, where George O'Keeffe is now a special place, but it wasn't when she lived there, right? Giverny, where Monet lived, is now a tourist destination, but it was really just an exurb of Paris, in that day. It wasn't special. And Arles, where Van Gogh got exiled because he was bugging everybody in Paris, was not a special place at all. And now people make meccas there to go see the sunflower fields he painted. And so my point is these places were really ordinary places, but the artists who lived there made art out of the ordinariness, right? The art became inseparable from the place. It's sort of like Kendrick Lamar and Compton, or even take Springsteen in New Jersey. I mean, the art there's inseparable. You can't separate Springsteen from New Jersey, right? He made art and what could be more ordinary than New Jersey, right? And yet he made this art from it. And if you start to look at artists throughout history, Jane Austen made art out of young love. Taylor Swift is making art out of a broken heart. These are ordinary things. And so the more I started to think about it, the extraordinary thing that they did was accept their ordinariness, and in a lot of times their ordinary place, and then make art out of it. Yes, it eventually, for the ones that are exceptional, it tends to make those places not ordinary in the future. But at the time the art was being made, they were very ordinary. It got me thinking along this whole line of making art out of the most ordinary parts of your life. Also, after making 5,000 images, doing this 12 and a half years, I can't even say it without laughing because it's so funny. I personally, a day for me that is the most fun is when I can find the most ordinary subject and then elevate it to something compelling, right? So if I can find real, a dandelion, or I did motherwort yesterday, really ordinary. If I did, the more ordinary the subject, if I can make a photo of it that's artful, that's compelling, that's showing it to somebody in a way they've never seen it before and they'll never think of it the same way again, then that's a win. That's a good day for me. So ordinary subjects, but also ordinary places and experiences. Anyways, those are my thoughts on ordinary.
No, I love that. And I'm going to get a little bit of heat for this, but I personally, when I look at other photographers' work that I highly admire, one of the things that I admire most is when people can take relatively mundane subjects or scenes and make a really fascinating photograph out of what's available to them. It doesn't have to be this crazy, insane, awesome vista with epic light. And to me, yes, those photos, of course, are beautiful. I have one right behind me, but it's also obvious, right? if I took 20 photographers to the top of that mountain when that sunrise was happening, I guarantee all 20 of them would be like, this is an awesome photograph,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And I'm not trying to discount that. Like I love beauty as well. But I think there does require a little bit more out of the photographer who can find a way to tease out something very artistic from a more nuanced or mundane subject.
Yes, 1,000%, I might be getting too off in my own artistic corner here, but like Vermeer versus Rembrandt, like Rembrandt's got those big, epic, significant historical events, and then Vermeer at the same time in the same style, but doing really quiet domestic things, kind of ordinary things, honestly, opening a letter, pouring milk or whatever. But anyway, I agree 1,000%. If I was a judge, if you can take the ordinary and elevate it to something extraordinary, I think that's an artistic achievement. I really do.
I agree. 100%.
Yeah. But if you take the extraordinary and capture it, you're still a good photographer.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Right. So yeah, you're a good photographer, but the elevating the ordinary, seeing the ordinary for its potential in the first place is the hardest part, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's, in the end, it's all about seeing, right? And
boom.
Yeah.
You said it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should just have people re-listen to that right there. Learning to see. I mean, it took me so long to even start to see stuff like that. And it still evades me very regularly. But when I do find something that's relatively ordinary and it captures my attention for whatever reason, I'm able to arrange it, capture it. I'm like, I just feel really good about it,
Yeah. It's interesting. I have I live in a suburb of the Twin Cities called Shoreview, just a northern suburb of the Twin Cities. And I have this book out, and the book obviously is all over in the shops around the Twin Cities. And several neighbors have come up to me and said, I'm your neighbor. I live down the street, and you live in a Shoreview I've never seen. You know what I mean? Because all of my images, all my found nature is 3 miles from my house, because it's me walking the dog. So they're all within 3 miles of the house. And they're like, I've lived here my whole life and I've never seen Shoreview like this, which is fun. That's a fun thing to hear.
That is a fun thing. Well, that's a great segue. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yeah, on May 1st, I had a book come out with Fiden Monicelli. It's called Still, the Art of Noticing by Mary Jo Hoffman. And it really, in some ways, is a commemoration of the first 10 years of this still project. It's still photos. For 1 year, I did black, so it's 90% white backgrounds, and probably 10% of them are black. It's like 300 images, 6 personal essays, and it's really talking about all the stuff we talked about. The essay on dailiness. There's an essay on the 72 microseasons, which is the same in my idea as placefulness. And the final essay is a how-to, how I do my practice. But the final personal essay is on this idea of a total work of art, or, art and place feeding each other. Anyway, so it's really, if you like some of these ideas, they're written up more, consistently or more thoughtfully in the essays. And the book is doing extremely well. Its first print run sold out quite fast.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. And the second print run arrives on September 30th of 2024. It will be back in Amazon and back in shops in early October. Yeah. The book is exceeded all my expectations, obviously all the publishers' expectations. People are really responding to it on really different levels, either from the nature or from the words about the creative process. And it's one or the other often, sometimes both, but people are really enjoying it.
Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. And we'll put links to all of that in the show notes so that people can go get a copy of your book for sure. So last question, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are a couple of people that inspire you?
Okay, so I have a couple photographers that are no longer living. Do you know Karl Blasfeld? Blasfeld, Karl with a K, German. If you look at his work, you'll see exactly where I got my inspiration. I saw his show about
Gotcha.
8 years before I started still. And I walked into somebody's living room that had the prints on the wall, and I was like gobsmacked. I just stopped in my tracks and said, what is this? And 12 years later, when I was setting up my one-a-day project, he was in the back of my memory clearly. So look at Karl Blasfeld. I like looking at the work of like Irving Penn, his still lives, not so much his fashion photography, but his still lives. And would be a great one for the exercise you talked about, which is, writing down, why am I responding to this? So those are sort of historical photographers that I like, but contemporary photographers I like. I think, some ways I think wedding photography is very artful. I know it's considered commercial, like my work could be considered commercial, but capturing the moment, I'm capturing the moment. My subject is just nature. My subject's easier. It doesn't run away. It
Sure.
doesn't blink or laugh or smile, but I think capturing the moment in wedding photography. So I have, like John Dolan, the guy who taught me the hip bump. He used to photograph for Martha Stewart. I love his work. He talks about the perfect imperfect. He's got a book out called Perfect Imperfect. So Neil James, Elisa Johnson, these are all contemporary artists that I think a lot of them are doing commercial or wedding photography, but I think in a really interesting way.
Perfect. Well, Mary Jo, this has been so much fun. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule to join me for a chat today.
I loved it. I loved talking. We could talk all day, and like I said,
I know.
we need to talk about how to make a living from being fine art photographers or something. So maybe we'll do another one someday.
I would be very happy to do that. Awesome.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Well, thank you to Mary Jo for the awesome conversation and providing us with daily inspiration through the lens. I'm confident that our listeners will have gained something by listening, so thank you. Each week when I put out a new podcast, I put some listener questions in the Patreon version of the show notes. I really would love to see more people engage with those questions. Don't worry, it's completely free to join and chime in. Just go to patreon.com/fstop and listen. I hope to see you there. Don't be a stranger. Please engage with the questions. It's super fun. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.